The wind howled across the frozen wasteland, cutting through the tattered clothing of the veteran as he trudged forward. Each step heavy with fatigue and memories of battles long past, his eyes scanned the horizon where jagged ice cliffs met a sky painted with pale streaks of dying light. He had walked this path before, yet the emptiness felt different tonight, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Ahead, a faint shimmer caught his eye like heat rising from snow, but colder, sharper, and unfamiliar. He paused, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, though he knew it was useless against whatever waited beyond the frost. He felt the hairs on his neck rise, and a sense of both fear and curiosity drew him forward. The crunch of ice underfoot seemed to echo in his ears, and each sound was magnified in the stillness. The veteran could feel the pull of something alive hidden in the cold, something desperate and pleading. He did not know what form it would take, yet he sensed it was not of this earth, and that instinct both terrified and intrigued him. Around him the world seemed to shift, the snow bending unnaturally as if alive, and the wind carrying whispers he could almost understand, but could not. The thought of turning back crossed his mind, yet the urgency in the air made him hesitate. His heart beat faster as he moved closer, the shimmer becoming clearer, shapes forming through the frost as if sculpted from ice itself. The shapes trembled, their forms small and large, wings folding against their bodies, yet he could see eyes glowing faintly in hues of blue and violet. He stopped dead in his tracks, frozen not by fear alone, but by the impossible sight of creatures that should not exist, frozen alien dragons, small ones with scales cracked with ice, and larger ones with wings trembling like fragile glass. They raised their heads in unison, their eyes meeting his, and he could feel a silent plea, heavier than any words he had ever heard. The veteran dropped to one knee, the cold biting through him, yet he could not look away. He sensed a story in those eyes, a history of survival and suffering that mirrored his own in ways he could not explain. He whispered a word he did not fully understand, yet it felt right, and the dragons shivered, their breath visible in the icy air, forming tiny clouds that hung between them like smoke, and for a moment, the world held still, waiting for the choice he was about to make. The veteran slowly rose, his eyes never leaving the dragons as they shuffled closer, their frozen wings brushing the snow in tentative movements. Each step they took seemed heavy with exhaustion, and yet full of hope. He could feel the weight of their trust pressing on him like a burden he was unprepared for, yet unable to resist. The largest dragon stepped forward, its icy claws leaving cracks in the snow, its eyes a deep swirling violet that seemed to pierce the very air around him. The smaller dragons clustered behind it, their breaths mingling with the mist that rose from the ground, making them appear ethereal and otherworldly. He extended a hand, unsure if the gesture would be understood, or if it would spark fear. Yet the dragons did not flinch, they simply tilted their heads, observing the human with a mixture of curiosity and desperation. The wind shifted, carrying a sharper chill, and the veteran felt the edges of his memory blur with the present images of scales and frost, and the echo of distant roars that were both terrifying and mournful. A sound came from the distance, a low hum that made the snow vibrate, and the dragons stiffened as if recognizing it, their eyes flickering to the horizon. The veteran followed their gaze and saw shadows moving beneath the ice cliffs, shapes massive and ominous. His heart sank as he realized the dragons were fleeing something older and far more dangerous than himself. He felt a surge of protectiveness and fear entwined in his chest, a reminder that despite years of solitude and survival he had never faced creatures like these that needed him not for battle, but for shelter and mercy. The dragons moved closer, still brushing against his legs, their icy bodies trembling with every gust of wind. He felt a connection, forming a silent bond that needed no words, a promise of safety if he dared to offer it. The largest dragon lowered its head, pressing it against his shoulder, a gesture both intimate and pleading, and he felt the warmth of its frozen body seep into him, a strange comforting sensation that defied logic. He knelt in the snow and murmured words that were not words, but a sound of agreement and understanding. The smaller dragons leaned in their claws, dragging slight scratches across his arms, leaving tiny trails of frost like marks of trust. The veteran knew then that there was no turning back. The world beyond the ice cliffs was dangerous and cruel, yet here was a chance to protect something extraordinary, something that could not survive without him. He scanned the horizon one last time, the shadows growing closer, and made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. The veteran rose slowly, his breath misting in the frozen air, as the dragons pressed closer to him, their eyes wide and filled with a mixture of fear and hope. He looked around the wasteland, knowing that the shadows beneath the cliffs would soon reach them, and yet he felt an unfamiliar surge of courage coursing through his veins. The largest dragon nudged his side with its icy snout as if urging him forward, and the smaller ones scuttled around his feet, their wings quivering against the biting wind. Together they moved toward a narrow crevice in the ice cliffs, a place he had noticed earlier that seemed to lead to a hidden cave. The veteran led the way, the dragons following in silent trust, each step crunching sharply against the hardened snow. The hum from the shadows grew louder, a low vibration that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. He glanced back and saw the shapes of the hunters emerging, massive creatures with scales darker than the night sky, and eyes that glowed with hunger. The dragons shivered visibly, their bodies trembling, yet they did not falter. They had chosen him, and he had chosen them, and there was no turning back. The entrance to the crevice loomed ahead, narrow and jagged, and he could feel the frost biting harder against his skin as they squeezed inside. The darkness of the cave swallowed them immediately, a sudden silence replacing the howling wind. The dragons huddled around him, their warmth strange and fragile against the cold stone walls. He reached out to touch one of the smaller dragons, its scales surprisingly soft despite the frozen exterior, and felt a connection deeper than words could ever describe. The hum outside faded, but the sense of danger lingered, a reminder that their sanctuary was temporary and fragile. The veteran whispered to them, in a voice hoarse from cold, yet steady, and the dragons responded with soft clicks and whines, their eyes glimmering like shards of ice in the dim light. He realized that this was the beginning of something neither he nor the dragons fully understood, a bond formed in desperation and trust, a story of survival and companionship that would test their courage and change them forever. He pressed his back against the cold cave wall, feeling the dragons curl around him, and for the first time in a long time he allowed himself to hope that even in a world frozen and hostile there could be moments of warmth and understanding that defied the cruelty. Beyond the ice, the veteran settled deeper into the shadows of the cave. The dragons pressed close around him, their frozen bodies radiating a faint warmth that made the cold stones slightly bearable. He watched them carefully, their eyes shifting in the dim light, as if measuring him as much as he measured them. The smallest dragon let out a soft trill, a sound like chimes in the wind, and the veteran felt a shiver run down his spine, the sound carrying a strange resonance that seemed to echo inside his chest. One of the larger dragons flexed its wings slowly, and frost flakes fell like snow from the tips, its eyes glowing brighter for a moment, revealing patterns across its scales like constellations in the night sky. The veteran leaned forward, tracing the patterns with his mind, wondering how such creatures could exist in a world so harsh. Outside the cave, the shadows moved with deliberate patience, waiting like predators who knew their prey could not escape forever. The veteran felt the urgency pressing in his chest, yet he could not leave the dragons alone. They had trusted him, and he could not abandon that trust. He touched the head of the largest dragon, and felt the ice shift under his fingers, a pulse of energy that was both alien and familiar, sending warmth through his hand. The dragons responded with small movements, curling tighter around him, their bodies vibrating with quiet energy, as if communicating silently through frost and resonance. The veteran realized that these creatures were not only alive but connected to him in ways he could not yet understand, a bond forged in desperation and need. He whispered words of reassurance to them, though he doubted they understood yet. They responded with clicks and soft hisses, a language older than time itself. The wind outside began to wail again, carrying with it the faint, metallic scrape of the shadows approaching. He knew the moment of choice was coming soon, and the sanctuary of the cave was only a temporary shield against a world that would not forgive weakness. He steeled himself, ready to face whatever came through the entrance, knowing that he and the dragons were bound together now by more than survival, by trust, and by the strange, fragile hope that something impossible could endure. The sound of scraping ice grew louder, shaking the cave with every echo. The veteran tensed his muscles, ready for whatever would emerge, yet he felt the dragons stir around him, their frozen bodies thrumming with an energy he could almost feel in his bones. The largest dragon spread its wings, slowly, a shimmering frost forming along the edges, and the smaller ones followed, its lead curling and uncurling like living icicles. The shadows outside pressed closer, their massive forms visible now through the narrow crevice, their eyes glowing with hunger and malice. The veteran drew a deep breath and stepped forward, placing himself between the entrance and the dragons, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, though he doubted its steel could harm what waited. He whispered to the dragons, a steadying sound, and they responded with low clicks that resonated in the cave walls. The largest dragon raised its head, and from its mouth came a breath not of fire but of frozen vapor, so intense, it formed crystals in the air, the temperature dropping sharply even in the confined cave. The shadows recoiled at the cold, yet pressed forward relentless, and the smaller dragons joined in releasing bursts of frost that arced through the air, forming sharp crystalline spikes that glimmered in the dim light. The veteran watched in awe, feeling the strange power coursing through them, a force alien and beautiful, yet terrifying at the same time. The battle of presence had begun, not with claws or steel but with the sheer will of the dragons and the human who refused to step back. The cave became a whirlwind of frost and mist, the air thick with tension and the promise of survival. The veteran felt a bond solidifying, the dragons trusting him and he trusting them. He realized that together they could stand against forces that would destroy them alone, yet the cost was unknown, and the fight had only just begun. The shadows paused, hesitating at the edge of the crystalline barrier, and the veteran knew that the moment of reckoning was approaching, and whatever happened next would change everything. The shadows hesitated, their glowing eyes narrowing as the frost from the dragons thickened the cave, filled with an eerie chill that wrapped around the veteran like a living thing. He tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword, though he knew it was useless against the creatures pressing against them, yet it gave him a sense of purpose. The largest dragon flexed its wings, sending shards of ice flying like tiny blades across the floor, the smaller ones darting forward with bursts of speed that defied their frozen forms, sending crystalline spikes arcing toward the intruders. The veteran moved with them, a strange coordination forming instinctively, guiding their attacks and dodges. He felt the energy of the dragons pulsing through the air like a living current, each movement synchronized with his own thoughts and reactions. The shadows hissed and roared, their massive forms pressing against the barrier of frost yet unable to penetrate it. The veteran's heart pounded, a rhythm matching the thrumming of the dragons, their bond deepening with every moment of shared fear and defiance. He could see patterns in the frost, the way the dragons controlled the cold with precision, shaping it into spears and walls that twisted and shimmered in the dim light. One of the smaller dragons launched itself high, scraping the cave ceiling with its claws, sending a shower of frost raining down on the advancing shadows. The veteran ducked and rolled, directing the flow with a hand gesture, guiding the shards toward their targets. The largest dragon let out a sound that resonated deep inside the veteran. It was not a roar but a hum vibrating through bone and muscle, a warning and a command at once. The shadows faltered, their hunger turning to caution, yet they did not retreat fully. The veteran knew this was only the first wave, that survival depended not just on strength but on the strange, fragile understanding between human and dragons. He pressed forward alongside them, feeling the cold bite into his skin, yet somehow warmed by the presence of creatures that had chosen him as much as he had chosen them. The cave became a battlefield of frost and instinct, a dance of survival where every movement mattered and the outcome hung suspended between hope and destruction. The shadows pressed harder, their forms massive and unyielding, yet the dragons held their ground, the cave vibrating with the clash of presence and cold. The veteran could feel every heartbeat, every pulse of energy, as if the air itself had become alive with tension. The largest dragon spread its wings, fully frost cascading in sparkling arcs that shimmered like glass, its eyes glowing brighter than ever, a signal of power and warning. The smaller dragons darted around the edges, unleashing streams of icy vapor that twisted into razor-sharp shapes and spun through the air like living weapons. The veteran moved with them, guiding their attacks instinctively, his mind and body attuned to the rhythm of their power. Each strike forced the shadows back, leaving marks in the ice, like scars of a battle older than time itself. He could see the frustration in the creatures, their glowing eyes narrowing, their patience wearing thin. Yet for every move the shadows made, the dragons responded faster, sharper, smarter. He felt a surge of awe and fear at the intelligence and alien nature of these beings. The largest dragon exhaled a concentrated pulse of frost that spread outward, engulfing several of the shadows, causing them to stumble and hiss, their forms frosting over their dark scales. The smaller dragons followed, with synchronized movements, creating a lattice of crystalline barriers that twisted and shifted in the air. The veteran realized then that this was more than a fight. It was a test, a trial of trust and courage, and the bond he shared with these creatures. The shadows faltered at the combined force, their advance slowing as the dragons and human moved as one. He pressed forward, feeling the dragons lean into him, their energy feeding his own resolve. A final decision hovered in the air, the moment of truth where the outcome of survival would be determined by instinct and unity, and the veteran knew that whatever happened next would define the lives of all of them in ways he could not yet imagine. The shadows retreated slowly, their glowing eyes fading into the distance, leaving behind a silence so profound it pressed against the veteran and the dragons alike. He sank to his knees, exhausted, his muscles trembling, yet a strange exhilaration ran through him. The dragons gathered around him, curling their icy bodies, closed their scales brushing against his arms and legs, a sensation both alien and comforting. The largest dragon lowered its head, resting it gently against his shoulder, its violet eyes softening as if acknowledging his courage. The smaller dragons circled him, chirping and trilling in patterns. He could almost understand a language of gratitude and relief. He reached out tentatively, tracing the patterns of frost along their wings and scales, feeling the pulse of their energy echoing in his own body. The cave felt alive with a quiet warmth, a stark contrast to the frozen wasteland outside. The veteran realized that he had become part of something greater, a bond forged in desperation, trust, and shared struggle. The frost around them shimmered in subtle patterns, reflecting their unity and the strange harmony of survival. He closed his eyes, letting the dragon's presence steady him, and for the first time in a long while allowed himself to breathe freely. The world outside the cave remained harsh and unforgiving, yet inside this small refuge there was understanding and hope. He knew that this was only the beginning. The dragons had chosen him as their protector, and he had chosen them as his companions. And together they had faced the impossible, and survived. The wind howled beyond the cave entrance, a reminder that the world waited, and that their journey together was far from over. The veteran stood at the mouth of the cave. The dragons gathered around him, their eyes glowing softly in the fading light of the frozen horizon. He took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs, and felt the weight of what had just passed settling into his bones. The largest dragon nudged him gently, its wings brushing against his back, a silent promise that they would follow him wherever he went. The smaller dragons leaped and twirled around him, their playful movements a stark contrast to the peril they had just faced. He smiled despite the chill, realizing that they had become more than creatures in need of shelter. They were companions, allies, in a world that had long seemed empty and cruel. The veteran adjusted his pack, feeling the familiar weight, yet now it carried a different meaning, a symbol of responsibility and connection. Together, they stepped out of the cave into the frozen wasteland, the wind biting at their faces, but no longer as frightening with each other by their side. The dragon's breath shimmered in the air like frost fire, illuminating the path ahead, and the veteran felt a surge of determination. He knew that challenges awaited, that the shadows might return, yet he also knew that together they were stronger than any threat. The wasteland stretched before them, vast and uncharted, and for the first time, he felt the thrill of journey and discovery, alive and unstoppable alongside his alien dragons.